So in today's video we're going to talk about the grip. I'm going to show you how the pros grip the club and the reason why you should be copying it as well. Let's get stuck into it. Okay, so the first thing that we want to understand is that when we hold the club, the hands come in towards the centre of our body. So if we focus on the lead hand first, the lead hand as it comes into the centre line of our body will naturally sort of rotate inwards. Now, as your trail hand comes on towards the club, it's kind of want to do the same sort of thing. However, it's got to go lower than the lead hand. So what you don't want to do is sit it directly on top of the club, because otherwise you're going to become very stuck. So what you want to do is make sure that your trail hand is sitting more to the side of the club. Now what I say to all my students is you want to imagine that if your trail hand was to just work on its own, it wants to feel like it's pushing the handle of the club towards the target. And then what we see with professional golfers, it's the blend of this type of motion and rotation that gets them into a great impact position. So the last thing you want to do is try and have this arm too straight on the club, because it's going to be pushing the handle towards your body line rather than more towards the target line. If you can get used to that, the second thing that's really important is where the club sits in the fingers. And the most common used grip with professional golfers is that, yes, they'll hold the club in the fingers as I'm demonstrating here, but what you'll also tend to see is the way they'll get the actual grip itself closer towards the palm. So that's in the palm. That's no good because you can't produce a wrist cocking motion. But what you want to avoid is gripping it too much in the fingers. Can you see this angle difference here? This is going to cause too much kind of angle in this wrist position, which again is not often used with most professionals. That's why we tend to see them grip the club kind of just so the heel pad is sitting on top, but can you see the way this angle between the forearm and the club is not too excessive? The reason why I'm suggesting that you guys should copy this is it will give you freedom to play around with your wrist positions. If you're somebody who notices you grip it this way, well then you're not going to be able to use your wrists as much as you'd like in the golf swing. The reason why I'd suggest you copy the professional golf grip is it gives you more freedom. Now when I meet students that either reach out for help, you know, online, or they come through that door, they've often experimented, and I think that's a good thing to do. But what we know with the professional golfer is in the top of the backswing position, the club face is anywhere between parallel to the wrist, so that means square, to more horizontal. The problem is if you ever go past horizontal, you've basically ruined your golf swing. The club face becomes essentially too shut, where you're either going to come down and the club face is always going to point too closed, or you're going to have to make a huge compensation. So by gripping the club as I demonstrated earlier, similar to what the professional golfer does, it gives you freedom to play around with wrist position. So if you want to start playing around with flexing your wrist, that's fine. You can see the club face position here. If you want to kind of, you know, do whatever, bow it, you can. The problem is if you grip it too much in the fingers and then you start trying to flatten the wrist, can you see what happens to the club face? And that's when you do end up in a big problem. If you get that club face too shut in the backswing, this is why you'll often find that doesn't matter how hard you try, you can't stop from leaning back. And this is a common problem, which is again the reason why I'd suggest you grip it more like a pro. Last question would then be, okay, well if you understand that and the effect that the grip can potentially have on things like wrist positions and the club face, then the last question would be grip pressure. Should you be gripping it loose or should you be gripping it tight? Again, I'm not too concerned about this. I'd probably say generally you'll be surprised you have to grip it much tighter than you probably realise. But by practicing with a simple tee could fix all of your problems. There's two ways in which you want to do this. The first way is you want to make sure that as I hold the club, can you see the way the tee peg sits here between the heel pad and the club itself? The reason for that is because as I swing back, I should make sure that the heel pad stays in contact with the club itself. You may think you're doing this, but what tends to happen is most amateurs get the arms too close to the body and then the club starts to let go, which means that the tee will drop. This will cause a huge amount of inconsistency. What I've also now done is, can you see the way I've positioned the tee peg in between my sort of trail palm and lead thumb? Again, it's the same thing. As I swing back, I want to make sure that my right palm stays in contact with my lead thumb, because that helps me keep the hands further away from the body and apply width. If again I let go of that and that tee peg drops out of my hands like so, this would mean that again my arms are too close towards my body. So the feeling of gripping it tighter and pushing the club further away would be a very helpful feeling to have. So to sort of summarise, you basically want to grip the golf club as neutral as you possibly can, because it gives you the most amount of flexibility to play around with stuff. However, if you are the type of golfer that's watching this video and you do have a notable, should we say, more sort of finger position grip, and you notice that you play your best golf by not trying to play around with your wrist positions and allow it to stay cupped, and you have good rotation through the golf ball, then that can obviously work absolutely fine. But what I tend to see is lots of golfers play around with it, which is why I would adopt the more neutral grip. See you soon.